Welcome back, everyone. This is Chris of Punk and Paisley, and today I'm happy to present Let Them Eat Jellybeans, which is far and away one of my all-time great desert island discs. One of my favorite albums of all time. It's way high up there, and I'd like to give it a decent review. It is personally important to me in that it's one of the very first 10 records that I ever bought in my life, and raised the bar on my expectations for what music could be, music should be, for what the package of an album should look like, for what the level of quality and the level of interest that I should have in a release should be. Just really set a very high bar for me and set me on I think a really good, strong path for my expectations for what to get out of music, which is so important in all of our lives. Really, really difficult to underestimate the impact of this album overall. And I think that just reading the text on the back from Jello Biafra would be really helpful to understand what this is and why this is. It says, when Dead Kennedys toured the United Kingdom and Europe, we were amazed at how little people knew about the American and Canadian underground. While America imports hundreds of thousands of independent records, only a paltry, unrepresentative few trickle back across the Atlantic. Many people on both shores are in an ideal position to help. Many are still set in their provincial ways and continue to turn up their nose. Alternative labels in the US have taken much longer getting their foot in the door. The country is so damn big the communication is sometimes difficult. Now this is something that's very important to remember, that back in 1980, 1981, when this is being compiled and released, it was much more difficult to communicate with people over distance. Long-distance telephone calls were expensive. People were doing most things by mail. You didn't have the World Wide Web, obviously, and you did not have a lot of the communications ability that you do now, even at the level of phone calls. Phone calls to set up a tour, like Black Flag did, in the early 80s, and sort of chart the path for all of these hardcore bands connecting with each other and making a tour route. Those phone calls alone were pretty damn expensive. So this compilation comes out. It has 17 bands. Despite the American flag on here, and it says 17 extracts from America's darker side, it's actually 15 from the United States and 2 from Canada. From Western Canada, with 2 classic Canadian bands. We'll get to that content in just a moment. By the way, this is Winston Smith art. Winston Smith, who to this day is doing wonderful collage work with so many different, particularly alternative rock artists and punk artists. This artwork here with Ronald Reagan and the inverted American flag, you might be wondering what Jellybeans is all about, and you need to be a certain age to understand that. Ronald Reagan swept into power in 1980 with help from the moral majority, and it turns out help from keeping Iranian hostages locked up, and help from a lot of really dark forces in the United States, things that nobody's really fully recovered from yet. Prior to his being shot and really having this steep mental decline in which he becomes sort of a doddering, eventually a laughingstock by the end of his presidency, whose wife is consulting the White House astrologer to make his appointments, and is a fabulist who's just concocting memories of places he never was, and that sort of thing. But the vigorous Reagan of 1980 that so many Greatest Generation and older people voted for, this right-wing sweep, which we'll talk about with the lyrics and content of a lot of these songs, a lot of which are a reaction to this, a direct reaction to this. He was made out to be this affable, likable grandpa kind of guy, and part of that was, well, he likes jelly beans. He likes to eat jelly beans, and people were sending gift baskets of jelly beans to the White House, probably illegal, unregistered FEC campaign donations is what those would be considered. I don't know what happened. Hopefully the White House staffers ate some jelly beans on their way to the unemployment line. yeah, so that was his humanizing thing. He likes jelly beans, like, you know, the way that I guess we say Trump likes his double cheeseburgers and Joe Biden likes an ice cream cone, and we pretend that the reason that Joe Biden is eating an ice cream cone in public is, you know, is not that that's the only thing that he could choke down in public without having to chew, and otherwise that would be a god awful atrocity. I don't remember actually seeing Reagan eat any jelly beans. It was just a thing put out there that Reagan likes his jelly beans. Maybe he couldn't choke them down too well either. Who knows? Who knows what state his choppers were in at that stage of his life. In any event, it's like Let Them Eat Cake. And we have 17 absolutely incredible tracks here. And this is going to be, I'm going to do my rating system of 1 through 10 for each track, do weighted averages, and then I'm also going to slap on my X Factor, weight that like a track, which is the entire package of the album, see how that rates 1 to 10. And I can tell you that this is going to be one of the highest rated albums that I could ever rate, because it is difficult for me to overstate. If you are a fan of punk rock, if you're a fan of hardcore, if you're a fan of alternative music, if you're a fan of anything interesting, if you have blood pulsing in your veins that is interested in anything remotely extreme, interesting, or alternative, this is an absolute must for you. So I'm not, spoiler alert, I like the album, but we already knew that. And let's go through track by track and we'll see how that shakes out. Now, your first track is Flipper. Flipper from San Francisco took the slow approach to the point where it would irritate audiences, where they had tracks that would crawl along and tracks that were repetitive and tracks meant to provoke audiences. And here they actually have a shorter one. It's the song Ha Ha Ha, which might have been selected for its brevity, so that it could fit in on an album where they are trying, obviously, to squeeze in as many new sounds to get out there to a public that's hungry for this sort of thing. And Ha 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 is the Flipper sort of sloppy sludge. You hear, when you put the needle on the record, and if you start on side 1, you hear this little tape hiss. The first thing you hear is a little tape hiss that tells you that things are going. You are not listening to a Yes record. You are not listening to Kansas. This is clearly something that was more crudely produced, although the sound on here is really quite good for the most part. But the Flipper track is one of the more crudely produced, almost demo quality tracks on here. You hear that little bit of tape hiss, and then you get into the sludgy track and this tape loop thing happening with this lyric that mocks consumerism and mocks the idea of the life left unexplored. And this is coming from people that were addicted to heroin. So how low is your opinion of middle suburban America if you're strung out on smack and looking at other people down your nose? But that's what this track is. There's the tape loop, and tape loops not being as easy to do when you were working with physical tape and not digital. And I think it's a wonderful song. I give it a 9, and that, of course, leaves us with a 9 for the overall rating for the album. The second track, we are visiting Canada, Western Canada, British Columbia, and perhaps the best known these days Canadian punk band, which would be d.o.a. d.o.a. has an incredible hardcore track titled The Prisoner, which is absolutely classic in every way. Their blend of, a lot of people said that early d.o.a. sounds a bit like early Clash, which I kind of hear and don't hear. But if you could imagine something off the Clash's first album, their debut album, mixed with something at hardcore speed, a track off of d.o.a.'s Hardcore 81 album, literally genre defining. The track is The Prisoner. It's a 1984 style lyric, quite popular with good reason as 1984 was approaching. That's a 10. That is a hard 10. That is absolutely just one of the, to me, one of the catchiest classic tracks of 80s hardcore, hard to beat, and an absolute classic. And that brings us up to 9.5 thus far for the album. In the third position on side 1, we have Black Flag. Black Flag, who are described, I'll be showing you the poster, but they're still saying it's Henry Garfield He's not Henry Rollins yet. That's how early we're catching people. Henry Garfield on vocals for the classic Black Flag track. I may use the word classic quite a lot for this compilation. Police Story, which is a slice of life of the war between Black Flag and punk rockers in the LAPD. A bitter denunciation of the LAPD and people's lives trying to deal with brutal cops. Trademark Black Flag chugging guitar. A little too much Greg guitar leads for my taste, just a little bit. So I rate the track a 9 instead of a 10. That brings us down to 9 1/3 points for the album. But again, absolutely classic Black Flag. I'll say something a little controversial. I actually am a bit of a bigger fan of Dez and even Keith's vocals on the really early stuff that you get on a release like Everything Went Black than I am of a lot of the Rollins period stuff. I know that that's going to make me maybe a few detractors and maybe leave a few sour comments in the comments, which is fine. You're allowed to do that. Everybody gets an opinion. In 4th position, we finally go to the East Coast, and it's Bad Brains, who at this point were still in Washington, D.C. And it is not only is it their track Pay to Come, it is the 1979 single release version of the track Pay to Come, which is fast as all hell, catchy. It has cowbell. If you're looking for, if you got a fever for that cowbell, it's got a little cowbell. Just an absolute classic track. One of the all-time great songs by one of the all-time great bands. I give it a 10. That brings us up to a 9.5 for the album. You've got your money's worth already in the first 4 tracks on the album. In the 5th position, we have Dead Kennedys. You know they're going to make an appearance. This is virus number 4 on the Alternative Tentacles label. We know it's Jello Biafra writing the liner notes. We know that we're discussing the fact that this is a label that initially was putting out Dead Kennedys releases and is looking, if I read the entire notes here, is looking to put out more releases from many more North American bands, which they would do, and more in the coming decades to this day. And you get the Dead Kennedys track, Nazi Punks Fuck Off, which is a great lyric. It came out as a single, which came with an anti-Nazi armband. This is at a time when it was still common for there to be Nazi skinheads, or not even skinheads, right-wing people who were affiliating themselves with punk and showing up at shows and beating people up. Jello's lyric takes a crack at that. Now, this is also a track from the In God We Trust Incorporated 12-inch EP, which was also one of the first 10 records I ever bought. And I was way more into that when I was however old, 14, 15, than I am now. I do not think that is the best period of Dead Kennedys. I think that kind of thrashing away really wastes the ability of all of the band members. At this point, Darren's on drums. And we're just starting to hear Darren on drums. We don't really know what he could do yet because he's being asked to play 1,000 miles an hour. But you don't get the benefit of Ray and Klaus's incredible guitar work. And when they're playing 1,000 miles an hour and kind of going full stream in the hardcore, moving away from the fresh fruit for rotting vegetables type material, you don't get to hear that surf and rockabilly influenced guitar and the songwriting abilities of these guys in the band. It's really, as I've gotten older, it is not my favorite Dead Kennedys stuff. In fact, these days, I don't even know that I own In God We Trust Incorporated on vinyl any longer. I don't think I do. I have all of their other stuff. I may have that in, I think it was packaged with something else in CD form. So I think I have it that way still. But not my favorite thing. Musically, lyrically on point, musically not my favorite DK stuff. And I only ended up giving it a 6, which brings us down to an 8.8 for the album. Still an extremely strong album. In the 6th position on side 1, we have Circle Jerks with another absolutely classic hardcore track, Paid Vacation. It's got really nice guitar work for them. It's a well-written song. It's a galloping beat, and it's got this fantastic Keith vocal and lyric, really premonition about U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. Now, the United States was already involved in backing Osama bin Laden and the Taliban in Afghanistan, but you didn't have a whole lot of, aside from, I guess, some spies and maybe some special forces, you didn't have a whole lot of Americans on the ground, as you would in later decades. So unfortunately, one of those 80s songs with a lyric that sounds like it would have been dated, but ended up being for the ages and being a premonition of decades to come. Most unfortunately, a lot of 80s hardcore you could say that about. Everything old is new again. Nuclear war fears, economic problems, plus ça change, right? An absolute classic Circle Jerks track. I give it a 10, and that brings us up to an average of 9 for the album, which is absolutely incredible. 7th position on side 1, we go down to Houston, Texas, with this sui generis band, Really Red, one of the great early 80s hardcore bands, coming out of Houston of all places. What kind of 10-ton gonads did it take to be in a place like Houston, Texas, and be in a hardcore punk band and release these incredible, short, somewhat artsy, angular bursts of hardcore, which still manage to be catchy. They're in and out, fast as hell. Usually fairly simple and direct lyrics from Really Red. I mean, this track doesn't disappoint. The track is Prostitution. It's screaming perfection. I mean, I give it another 10, and that brings us to a 9.14 because I do significant digits on this channel for the album as a whole. Just killer track after killer track on this album. 8th position, we're going to Phoenix, Arizona, before they relocated to the San Francisco Bay Area, and I understand that there was some drama involving the Feeders. Feeders, frank discussion, who, according to some accounts, ended up poaching Jello Biafra's girlfriend at a time when people were still talking about girlfriends in terms of like they were property or the result of some variety of legal settlement. And the Feeders have this incredible track, Jesus Entering from the Rear, which is sometimes just, I think on their 4-song EP, which is mentioned on the poster, it may just be titled Jesus and maybe Entering from the Rear. The Feeders sound was pretty interesting in that Frank Discussion was playing guitar, finger picking an electric guitar, and you got this sort of Peter Gunn feel. In fact, they covered the Peter Gunn theme song. Sort of menacing instrumental surf type approach to songwriting from Feeders a lot of the time. Really a cut above in many ways, musically, and with this sort of non-distorted or semi-distorted twangy guitar sound that you're getting, that it puts a foot into sort of more general alternative music, alternative rock, punk, and a foot in hardcore, and this really unsettling lyric that most people these days would consider to be homophobic given its content, and that's entirely understandable, against religion, against Christianity in the bluntest manner possible, basically using anal sexual assault as a metaphor for Christianity. Hey, that might be something where you're saying that would be considered fairly well radical in a lot of circles now. You have to imagine the world of 1980, 1981, in which Ronald Reagan is just coming into office, and in which half of the people who were living in the United States at the time are now dead. This is a different world. This is an entirely different world that we're talking about. We're talking about an era in which you were not allowed to say the word bitch on TV, in which, you wouldn't discuss entire topics on television, in which you wouldn't get entire songs or topics on the radio. It was a different, way more conservative world. And this is just radicalism on top of radicalism. This is something that's blowing people's minds when they hear it on a record. On a record, it's the type of thing that would be like the filthiest joke that you would hear in a bar, or something from the back pages of like Screw or some sort of pornography. You wouldn't expect to hear this in a song in 1981. This is radical. This is beyond. We've moved beyond Sex Pistols level of shocking here. Hard to describe how shocking this would have been to a lot of people when they put the needle on the record. And for a lot of people, it would have been this massive relief and release that there are other like-minded people in the world, or, oh, hey, we can feel free to discuss these topics, openly. Just a different world, hard to describe, especially for kids growing up in conservative households. Just a sea change. I mean, I give the Feeders track a 10, and that brings us up to 9.25 for the album. This is really strong stuff. In the 8th position on what we could term pretty much the hardcore or more straight-ahead punk side of the album, we have the Subhumans, not to be confused with Subhumans UK, Dick Lucas's classic British band, but the Subhumans from British Columbia, Canada, and they have a song that is more of a punk song, more of a punk rock. I'd say like 80% punk, 20% hard rock track titled "Slave to My Dick," which is funny to begin with. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a guy complaining about basically being a sex addict or being sex obsessed. And it's self-deprecating. It's funny. It is also a great rock song with a really tasteful guitar lead that doesn't go on for too long. There's a little guitar solo that actually fits in well, gets in and gets done. Don't mind it one bit. Less hardcore, more rock punk paced, and I give that track a 10, and that brings us up to a 9.25 points for the album. Then we flip the record. We flip the record to side 2, and it's our more experimental side. We've got punk, and we've got new wave, and we've got other influences, and I really appreciate the fact that this was split into 2 sides. You have your mostly faster songs. On the whole, mostly faster, more straight ahead, mostly 4/4 time, hardcore punk, and then side 2 is your more experimental side. So side 2, we go down to Los Angeles. Geza X of Geza X and the Mommy Men fame, who was also becomes a pretty big time punk rock producer in the LA area, has a off-kilter, demented song called Isotope Soap, which we could say is kind of on the line between quirkier new wave, using new wave as a musical genre title. I should really make a whole video about the uses and abuses of the term new wave. Quirky, new wave, also somewhat political new wave punk song called Isotope Soap, which is completely off-kilter. It has some keyboard on it and some interesting percussion, and I really think Off Kilter is a wonderful description of it, and the strange Geza X vocals and a pretty funny anti-pollution lyric, and I give it a 9. It's good stuff. That brings us to a 9.4. We're staying down in Southern California with B People. That's the letter B followed by the word people, who were a really very innovative band. One time I had the B People album, or a B People album. I think I need to get my hands on that again, because it is not straight ahead punk. These are guys who were clearly more talented musicians, who were incorporating different instrumentation and different arrangements, and were not just, they could play fast, but they were also mixing it up a lot in terms of genre bending, in terms of time signature and arrangement bending. One track doesn't necessarily sound exactly like the next, and some really thoughtful lyrics. And here you get one of their shorter, faster songs, which is titled Persecution, That's My Song. They do there's wonderful guitar work on it, which shows that these guys were musicians probably prior to entering punk. There's keyboard on it, but it's also very fast and aggressive and has very compelling effects with layered vocals. So it sounds like there's a whole lot more voices than just the 4 guys in the van. I love this song. I give it a 10. That brings us up to a 9.5. 4, 6. There's some saxophone on there as well. It's really very interesting stuff. We have a track from a band called Wounds, who I believe are from Northern California. The track is titled An Object. And the key word here is dark. It's dark. It's the dark side of punk rock, leaning a little into goth, with a very dark, evocative lyric. The lyrics on these last two tracks, the Be People track and the Wounds track, are just a cut above. I mean, these are introspective, they're smart. What you're also getting here, and this is something that I think I need to discuss in general in future, you're also getting people who were not living at home, right? These people are a little bit older. They're into their 20s, most of these folks. They're living independently. It's also an economy that lets somebody move out of the house, get a minimum wage job, and have an apartment somewhere, have some roommates, and live in an urban center where rents were dirt cheap because people didn't want to live in cities at the time. There had been flight to suburbia. So a lot of these people, you know, they're either art students or they're hangers on to art scenes or punk rock scenes. And what they want to do with their lives is they want to be in a band. And they're 22 years old and they're not living in their parents' house. And they have really this total freedom. And I think that you're hearing a lot of that in these lyrics. People are being a bit more confrontational and whatnot, and they are not the Hot Topic crowd, and they are not playing to the Hot Topic crowd. They're playing to people who are a little bit more mature, both in their age and their attitudes. And I think that that's a big separator between the punk rock of this era and the necessity and the desire to be making statements about the independence of your life. And a lot of stuff you get later where I think that it's just not the same. It's not the same when you're 17 and, you know, your parents are paying the bills and you're playing songs about like not being accepted at school or whatever. These people are having introspections about the nature of humanity and or really radical political and religious statements. So An Object is a fantastic song. The Wounds is one of the bands on here where I checked out their other work subsequently years later. Just couldn't find another track that was as compelling as this. A lot of these bands put their best song on this album because this was a big chance to get out there in the world and introduce themselves. And that's another point, is that these days, with everybody signing contracts and having and being able to release everything, remember, this is before CDs exist. This is when even demo tapes were expensive to produce and distribute. Not everybody's getting things out on vinyl. There's not much of a distribution network for this sort of thing. So people are really putting their best foot forward. They're giving a lot of their best tracks to Alternative Tentacles to put out, to get it out there in the world. And that's a lot of bands that go on to be signed with, they have agreements now with all sorts of different, you know, mid to large size labels. That didn't exist in 1980, 81 when this is being put together. So you're probably not getting this again. You're not getting this again. You're not getting this collection of this type of bands again. But Wounds were one of the smaller bands. They didn't put out a whole lot. What else I've heard from them can't possibly be as good as this. I mean, I think it's their best song, is the point I'm making there. I give it a 10, and that brings us up to a 9.5 average for the album. It's an incredible album. In the next position, we have a group called The Offs, whose mailing address on the poster is in New York City. And they do a really interesting stew of, it's a fusion track, really. It's kind of a rock, ska, jazz fusion. There's saxophone, there's kind of the reggae ska beat, but very, very rapid. There's horns on there. And there's a lyric that appears at first glance as a racist lyric, and then you hear more of it and you realize that it's an anti-racist statement, and a fun, danceable, really track. Again, The Offs, I looked up other stuff of theirs eventually, years later, when the internet rolled around and you were able to track some things down. Never heard anything that was as good as this song. Everyone's a Bigot is the title. It's fun and has a point. And I can listen to it over and over, and I have for 40 years now, almost 40 years, and I give it a 9. It's a wonderful track. It brings us down to a 9.46 for the album, which is extraordinarily strong. In the next position, we have one of many bands that you'll find in Discogs or other music databases with the title Anonymous. Anonymous is the name of the band. And they do, again, a very quirky tape loop keyboard meets rock, messy. It's sort of new wave band instrumentation with punk energy and sloppiness, and a great lyric. The title of the song is Corporate Food, which tells you pretty much all you have to know. And it's a wonderful track. I give that a 9 as well. And that has us at a 9.43 for the album overall. In the 6th position on side 2, we have Half Japanese. The band Half Japanese, if we could call it a band. I believe this is a Jad Fair project. They have a noise track. I'm using the word noise here in a more formal sense. I'm not saying the word noise just to be denigrating. I think that you could fairly say that the genre of music that you would classify this as is noise. This is total art school banging on instruments noise. It's barely a song. It's intended that way. I was glad that I was exposed to this at a very young age because I was vaguely aware of the fact that these things were out there, that there were things like musique concrète. This is not quite that. I was aware of the fact that in the tape trading world, there were a lot of sort of outsider artists and people doing a lot of projects that were just noisy, that weren't necessarily 4/4 timed rock based. Good for me to know. Good for me to know it was there. However, I gave it a fresh listen yesterday. Again, I've been hearing this for 40 years. Don't really need to hear it again. I give it a 2. And that brings us down to an 8.93 for the album, which is still remarkably strong. In the penultimate position, we have Christian Lynch. Christian Lynch was one guy, an American guy who moved to West Germany. He would describe it as self-imposed exile in West Germany, living outside of the United States. This is pretty much one guy who's playing all the instruments. There's keyboard stuff. This is a very dark, pounding track and very political. The track is called Joke's on You. It directly tackles everything that was coming with the Reagan administration. Little did people know for the next 8 years and then beyond. I feel like we're living in like the 8th term of the Reagan administration. I think we're just stuck in that. It never went away. You can change party, but policies just get, if anything, gets worse and worse. And unfortunately, the Joke's on You lyric rings as true now, or not more now, than it did 45 years ago. If people listened to and internalized and acted upon what these bands were saying about the world, we would be living in a much better world than we are today. But instead, we've got 45 years of crap. Because people didn't listen to these bands and didn't take things to heart and didn't make changes. So I don't know what statement that is, but you need this now more than ever. Joke's on You is a wonderful song. I give it a 9, and that brings us up to, what is that, an 8.88, all 8s, 8.88, an auspicious number we have with one track remaining. In the 8th position on the B-side, we have Voice Farm, who were a very synthy-based group out of San Francisco, who were doing some really mellow, somewhat dark, this would be light listening, maybe very light dancing stuff with a lot of synth, and just a track which I'm glad it was on here. I'm glad I heard this. I'm glad I was exposed to this on a record where I like so much of the other material. I'm a fan of this song. It's grown on me. Again, I will say it again. I tracked down other songs by Voice Farm, who were not a huge band, didn't release a whole lot. Nothing was as good as this. The track is called Sleep, and I give that another 9. And that has us, I must have done some math wrong here, or did I? Because I still have us at 8.88 All right, folks. Then we look at the package. We're going to look at the whole album and ask the question, how does it rate as a package? And I have to say, you cannot overstate the importance of this record at the time. You can't overstate it. This was I would have bought this in about 1985 or 1986 when it was still 4 years later. It was still serving as an introduction to a lot of these bands, because a lot of us, especially when you're, a teenager, you don't have the most money in the world. There isn't the record distribution out there that there was now. I was very fortunate to find a copy of one of these. I happen to live in a major city with a lot of record stores. I take for granted now the fact that I could walk into a record store, look for something like this, and there it was. There was a new copy. The selection of tracks and bands is stellar. The Winston Smith art is fantastic. It captures the zeitgeist of punk rock and hardcore at the time, like nothing else, with Reagan coming into office in January of 1981. You can't beat that. You have the explanation from Jello, and then, as if all of this isn't enough, and the sound quality is great, you have this incredible poster with lyrics, with, of course, it's black and white, photos of the band members, and the tentacles everywhere for Alternative Tentacles, and addresses where you can write them, and information about what other records they have out, and in some cases how to order them. Stellar. I mean, it's a classic stellar. It raised the bar for me. It set the bar for me for what a punk rock compilation should look like, which is almost unfair. Look and sound like. That's virtually unfair to everybody else. The X Factor is an absolute 10. You're not going to get better than that. You're not. And that brings us to an 8.94 overall rating for the record, which is about as high as you try this at home with any of your albums, and you use that numbering system, and it's almost impossible to get up near a 9. It's an absolute classic. Let Them Eat Jellybeans. If you were interested in this kind of music, if you want to know what the 80s were like, if you are interested in alternative cultures, radical cultures, any of that sort of thing, this album is a necessity. It's a necessity. You need it. And I'll tell you that it'll, unfortunately, everything I said about the lyrics, it may make you feel a little bit better to know that there have been like-minded people to you for the last 45 years, putting up with the same crap. It's for me, this is soothing to the soul. This is my lullaby music. It's been something I've listened to now for approximately 40 years, maybe exactly 40 years. I can't recommend it enough. Let Them Eat Jellybeans, the highest possible recommendation. There are different pressings, lots of different pressings that are going to come in at different values. And some of those are in Europe, so in the UK, and some of those are in the States. But definitely try and get yourself a copy, if at all possible. I did not do the thing that I do sometimes of looking up current prices on Discogs, but I think something in the $30 to $40 range is probably going to get you a copy of this album, whether it's a re-release or foreign pressing or what have you. I'll also tell you, I've owned 3 copies of this album in my life. The one I showed you is the 3rd copy that I've owned. It's a Scandinavian pressing. It looks like there's a Finland address on there. One of the first 2 copies that I owned of this album had a tax stamp on it, which was, I think, from Italy. There were ones from Italy and there were ones from Greece. And I remember years ago, decades ago, reading a Jello Biafra interview about that and some Dead Kennedy stuff that was similarly issued, in which, if I recall correctly, he was saying that those were bootleg pressings. So those may be out there as well, and I certainly have owned one of those. I still have a copy of the record downstairs, but the cover got messed up and the poster was missing. I've played the grooves out of this so much that I've owned now 3 copies of this record in my life. It is one of the first 10 things that I ever bought with my own money. And again, highest recommendation. It's a trip down memory lane for me. Positive and negative. Reliving the good and the bad. And I hope you enjoyed this review. I am definitely trying to get the subscriptions up. And obviously like, subscribe, and comment, share with a friend. I'd like the channel to continue and to have the motivation to do so. I'll also let you know, for anybody who's stuck it out this far, I'll let you know too that there is an issue that I'm having with the account associated with this YouTube channel. So it's conceivable that at some point I may need to respin these videos on another similarly named channel. If so, I will try to contact my subscribers and let you know that that's happening and give you fair warning so you can subscribe to the new channel and keep watching this content if it's something you enjoy. Please let me know if you like it in the comments, and I do read and respond to all of the comments. Thank you. Again, this is Chris from Punk and Paisley reminding you to keep on rocking in the unfree world.